Our devotional thought today from Leviticus is thoughts about offerings. Now you say, well, Pastor Sumrall, we don't live by the Old Testament law. Yes, but there are things that are there, as Paul would say, for our instruction. Now, I want you to notice 5 quick thoughts about how offerings were to be given to God. First of all, the offering is presented to the Lord. Leviticus 1 verse 3, if the animal you present, you don't send it, you present it. Remember, this is an act of worship. As a burnt offering is from the herd, it must be a male with no defects. Bring it to the entrance of the tabernacle so that you may be accepted by the Lord. Now bring it. Present it, bring it. Brothers and sisters, please forgive me. I know everybody wants to do online giving because everything about it is convenient. But bringing your offerings to God is not about convenience. It's about bringing honor to God. It's about an act of worship to God. Secondly, the offering was to have no defects. Verse 3, it must be a male with no defects. Verse 10, it must be a male with no defects. Chapter 3, verse 1, it must have no defects. Chapter 3, verse 6, it must have no defects. In other words, you don't give God your junk. You never bring an offering to God as something that is junk and that you just don't want it anymore. The offerings we bring to God should always be our best. For instance, Leviticus 2 verse 1, when you present grain as an offering to the Lord, the offering must consist of choice flour. Choice flour, not the junk, not what you're going to feed the pigs, and not what you're going to feed the chickens. Choice flour. Now, since most people ground their own flour, this was perfectly within their own ability at that time. It just meant you had to spend a little bit more time. The difference between choice flour and regular flour would be the amount of time you spent grinding it, and you got it finer and finer. So again, there's effort there. I want to give my best. I want to do my best for God. Thirdly, the offering must contain no yeast. Leviticus 2 verse 4, but without any yeast. Verse 5, it must be made of choice flour mixed with olive oil, but without any yeast. Chapter 2, verse 11, don't use yeast in preparing any of the grain offerings you present to the Lord. Why? Yeast represented sin. Remember, there could be no yeast in the upper room when Jesus had the Last Supper. All the yeast was to be removed. Yeast is symbolic for sin. Yeast is an exaggeration of the offering. When you put yeast in bread, it makes the bread bigger than it really is. It fills it up with air bubbles. Have you ever gone to the store and you bought a loaf of bread? And let's say you wanted to do something really special for the family, so you didn't buy the white bread on the shelf. You bought one of those beautiful round breads. And it was at a nice store, out in front of the supermarket. And you brought home this beautiful loaf of bread and you thought the family's going to really enjoy a special treat tonight. And when you cut the loaf of bread open, grabe talaga, it's nothing but air inside. Yeah, that's what yeast does. Never exaggerate the offerings, okay? Never exaggerate the offerings, like Ananias and Sapphira. Fourthly, the offering must not contain honey, Leviticus 2:11, because no yeast or honey may be burned as a special gift presented to the Lord. Honey makes things sip, okay? No offering is to contain sip, trying to make things sweeter than it really is. And lastly, the offering must contain salt. Leviticus 2:13. Season all your grain offerings with salt to remind you of God's eternal covenant. Salt is a symbol in the Bible of loyalty. He said, with every offering that you bring to the Lord, never forget, chapter 2, verse 13 of Leviticus, never forget to add salt to your grain offerings. Never forget, with every offering you bring before the Lord, you remember His loyalty and you remind yourself of your loyalty to Him.